All right, so we're going to get into the recent developments in the Ukraine, and I'm here with Lenny Wolff, a colleague, comrade. Welcome to the RNL show again.
Well, thank you, Andy, and I'm really looking forward to getting into this. It's very important.
Well, it is important, and it's one of these things where there's a dance going on here, and it's a deadly dance, and we're going to bring that out to people. And what are the stakes for humanity here and around the world, and what is it that people in this country need to do? So we're going to play some news clips right off the top that are going to set the stage.
Tanks.
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 Tanks to fight Russia.
We're really hopeful that the coalition for providing Ukraine tanks, because for us, tanks for Ukraine are tanks for freedom.
This could be seen as an escalation by Russia and thereby lead to a wider escalation in the war.
The U.S. is sending $2.5 billion in more ammunition and weapons. Tanks are, for now, a step too far.
It doesn't include tanks.
Germany has suggested they would not provide their own tanks unless the U.S. did the same. It's a major reversal.
A major shift for the U.S.
Today, I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine.
We have a window of opportunity here.
Sending Abrams tanks now sends a clear and unambiguous message to Putin that we will stop at nothing to defeat him.
All right, so I hope those clips gave you a sense of the deadly dance that is going on and the stakes of it. And I just want to, before we get into it, which is going to be where we're going to start, I want to just run by this quote from the deputy head of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev. He sent this in a telegram message to Western leaders, and he said to them who are ratcheting up the war, delivering weapon after weapon, he says, speaking, of course, of Russia, the loss of a nuclear power in a conventional war can provoke the outbreak of a nuclear war. Nuclear powers do not lose major conflicts on which their fate depends. This should be obvious to anyone, even to a Western politician who has retained at least some trace of intelligence, end quote. So, Lenny, this quote sums up, sarcasm aside or taken into account, the deadly stakes of this and where this could all head. So we want to talk some about this ratcheting up.
Well, I think one thing to understand is over a whole course of time, the United States has continually raised the ante. They said, we won't do this. We won't give that. We won't give Zelensky that. And then they've done it. They've pushed and pushed and pushed. And it's had an effect. The United States has been able to arm Ukraine, to give them the strategic understanding, to give them the intelligence necessary to hold back the Russian offensive. And so it's at a point now of a stalemate. But now what's happening is both sides are looking to actually escalate this in a way that's going to be very dangerous for humanity.
Yeah. What I would like to do, just to a little more set the stage here, is play a little snap of a podcast that the New York Times put up earlier this week on January 19th with Sabina Tavernisi and one of their main international correspondents, Eric Schmidt. And I think it captures some of this deadly dance we're talking about.
It seems like there's a pattern here, right? I mean, basically, Ukraine asked for some sort of weapon. The Biden administration debates whether to provide that weapon, eventually does provide that weapon. And that decision allows Ukraine to fight back against Russia in a new way, which then causes Russia to have to change its tactics to deal with that new weapon. And that sets off a whole new cycle of exactly the same thing.
That's right. We've seen this through these phases we've described, whether it's just the initial defensive phase to pushing back on the artillery. And now we've come to the next phase of this, which is what kind of new combat power can the West rush to Ukraine that they can learn to operate quickly that'll make a difference on the battlefield.
And it strikes me that as the months go on, and we increase these weapons supplies, bigger and stronger ones, there are fewer and fewer places to go in terms of increase, right? We've ticked up a lot. And at the same time, the risk is greater, a risk that we will trip over one of Putin's red lines and spark a nuclear conflict. So in a way, it turns out that Ukraine doing better and potentially being able to win this war has led to a place of greater risk.
So it's worth noting that Sabina says, it seems that the better Ukraine does, the more it ups the risk. And that's actually precisely right. And in a certain sense, maybe the New York Times is preparing people for that, or at least they're discussing what's actually going on. Because the dynamic that she's describing, and they describe here, is one in which one side does, Russia invaded, illegal, illegitimate, criminal, all of that, and then thought, as Bob Avakian pointed out last year in the interviews that we did with him on the RNL show, that perhaps he miscalculated and that he thought it was going to be an easy run. It turned out not to be that. And Biden and the main NATO powers were able to amass very quickly a response and give Zelensky a lot of munitions and tactical advice, and to halt that. And then this has been going back and forth. First, Russia does something, and then they get the weapons to counter that. Russia then figures out how do they move in relationship to those weapons. And so then that requires more weapons. And we've just seen this dance. In fact, just in the last 6 weeks, we've gone from Zelensky and the Ukrainians asking for Patriot missiles. The U.S. saying, no, that's a line we're not going to cross. He comes to the U.S. Congress, makes a speech that then the ruling class all claps for, and a lot of people who should know better joined in that applause, at least in their heads, and then they get the Patriot missiles, and it turns out that's not going to be enough because Russia's amassing, and they've just conscripted close to 500,000 people to throw on the front lines, to throw right at Ukraine, and now that means that Ukraine needs tanks. And the tanks have just been approved. So we've got a situation that's just being described there of ratcheting up. But the question is why? What are the interests here? What is actually being fought over here? And we have said on this show, and I think we should get into it more, this is a proxy war between two imperialist powers. That yes, you were pointing this out earlier, that in the beginning of the war, it might have been a legitimate war of the Ukrainian people for their sovereignty, but very quickly it came into one where it was a big power war of imperialist contention. So I think we should get into that to see where are the interests of humanity.
I would like to kind of, just for a minute though, continue to try to bring home this dynamic and the risk involved in it for people. Which you correctly described. It's not Zelensky who's driving this. It's not Russia who's driving this necessarily, or the U.S. There's a dynamic going on between these powers that's not totally within the control of any of them, and that's what makes the whole situation so extremely explosive. And there is a fact. The quote you read from Medvedev is very, very chilling. And the United States is fully aware of this, fully aware of the stakes, fully aware of what they're messing with. And what you have, it's a situation right now that we're facing. It's like you have a very high stakes poker game, and people have been betting and raising and calling, and then another card is dealt. And there's another round of betting, of raising, of calling, and some players are, nobody's dropping out in this game. And now everybody's got so much on the table. And what we just saw is if they really push a whole bunch more chips in. But the problem is these chips are human beings. These chips are Russians and Ukrainians. And right now, these chips are very potentially all of humanity that's being bet in a game of what? Of who is going to dominate Europe, and by extension then the key, principal and strategic parts of the world. So this is the danger of this moment is very, very, it's very fraught, and the stakes are very high.
They don't go out and say, well, we're ratcheting up this war to contend for our imperial domination for each of our empires. That's what we're doing. No, they pose this as a contest of, particularly to the people in Western Europe and in the U.S., as a conflict between autocracy and democracy. I just would like to play a little bit of the answer to the first question in the second interview that Sansara and I did with Bob Avakian on the RNL show on the war in Ukraine, where he speaks about this autocracy versus democracy. Take a listen.
I mean, I just have to comment, like you got all these people that pretend that they're progressive and whatever, and they're all going right along with U.S. imperialism and this, and under the banner that Biden and all these people are putting out about this is a world, this is a contest in the United States and throughout the world between democracy and autocracy. Trump is an autocrat. Putin is an autocrat. Xi Jinping is an autocrat. Of course, they don't talk about their own autocrats, like the heads of the government, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, you can go down the list, that are all part of their alliance. Hungary, Poland, what have you. Those are all autocratic governments. But there are autocratic governments. Like they said about the Shah of Iran back in 1978 when the uprising was occurring, which eventually led to his overthrow. There was an article that said the Shah, in one of the major newspapers in this country that said, the Shah of Iran may be a despot, but he's our despot. So, our autocrats are okay, but the ones that are challenging our dominance in the world and our ability to plunder and slaughter people all over the world, which is what they've been doing forever, those autocrats are no good. This is not a battle, just even looking beneath the surface, you can see that this is a battle between imperialist powers, all of which, on both sides, have whole histories of horrendous atrocities and, base themselves on vicious exploitation of people and oppression of people all over the world. This is what's at stake.
Yeah, I just want to take 1 minute to somewhat respond to and elaborate on that. First, this empire is very real. It's children in Africa mining minerals, as little children doing this in terrible, terrible conditions. It's people in, women, young women in Bangladesh or Vietnam, Cambodia, who are creating the garments we wear. There's the people in Mexico growing the winter vegetables for your table while the water table in their villages is going down and arsenic is seeping into it. All these things have to be, one, that's where this great standard of living comes from, that enables them to, for certain sections of the people, loosen the chain a little bit. And number two, this is defended by wars, where people are up in arms about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that invasion was unjust and wrong, and it's been murderous. But the United States, to build up this empire, the platform on which this rests, has killed, if you count it up, over somewhere between 7 and 9 million people just since World War II. Not during World War II, since World War II, as they've put this empire together. You go to Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, where they sponsored a coup, Central America, where they bankrolled people, all these things. It's and to talk about the United States has suddenly changed. The United States is suddenly, in this case, a force for good that isn't worried about and isn't being driven by the same concerns that have driven it always in all its wars, is just, you're telling yourself fairy tales and you're letting yourself be played. And people who should know better are doing this too. And this is why we have to go out and we have to really wage a fight with people over how they're looking at this and what they're thinking.
I think that's important. And just to say one more thing about it. The interests of humanity are not the same as the interests of the ruling classes of the entire world right now. And these ruling classes contend with each other. They're fighting. It's an expand or die, dog eat dog system, the capitalist imperialist system. They contend with each other. And you can see it here. You can see it in the struggle over Taiwan and China, between the US and these countries. We have to get out of thinking the way they think, tailing them, doing what they say, have them present choices to us and say, well, I guess it's either support Ukraine or support Putin. I guess it's either support Trump or DeSantis or support Biden. No, you have to get out of that thinking and think about the interests of humanity that are not the same as the interests of the imperialists. To really get into the stakes for humanity here, I just want to do two things. One, I want to strongly recommend, not only that you watch the interview that we did with Bob Avakian, both the section on Ukraine, but the whole thing, but also go to revcom.us, where we have, there's articles on Ukraine right on the homepage, but that can lead you to a resource page that really goes into this in a great deal of depth and from many different angles. And when you face something of this magnitude, it is a responsibility to understand everything you can about it and to know the truth about this. And then we should get into it and debate it about the things that you actually might disagree with that's there. But this is too important to ignore, and you cannot be passive in the face of what is going down.
I fully agree, man. And the stakes, again, this is very, Biden himself said this is Armageddon. You saw that movie Armageddon Time, or heard the class say? Biden himself said, oh, it might be Armageddon. And they are risking everything for they're driven to do that exactly by that expand or die mandate that they face, which is what they need to survive. If they don't, it is expand or die.
But the thing is, people can't accept this. I find it a bit insane that the future of humanity is at stake now, and people aren't flooding the streets around this. Oh, well, we only got two choices. What are we going to do? No, you don't only have two choices. You could stand up and act in the interests of humanity. And look, everywhere in the world, there's not going to be a different choice unless we make that different choice. And this is a show about revolution, nothing less. And we've got a leadership in Bob Avakian. We have a strategy that he's developed, and he's analyzed that we have a moment right now that's really unique, where a country as powerful as the U.S. could potentially be, this system could be overthrown. And the reason this could happen is because there's tremendous contention at the top of society, and they're constantly ripping up the norms of what have been before. You saw that around the Roe versus Wade thing, which Sansara is going to do a segment on later in this program. And even this war, and maybe in some ways, especially this war over Ukraine, could heighten the situation for millions of people, including here. And it's important that people actually see there's another way, including standing up against what they're doing and this proxy war that is cynically using the people of Ukraine as cannon fodder on the part of the U.S. and NATO bloc.
That war is not going to have that effect, though, unless people who do understand the stakes, or who can be won to understand the stakes, go out and fight with other people over what they're being sucked into. And is what you said, the alternative that actually does exist. We have a constitution that for the new Socialist Republic of North America that Bob Avakian wrote. And one of the elements of that is a whole different way of approaching the world, which includes, among other things, supporting revolution all over the world, but also a total renunciation of the production and use of nuclear weapons. This new revolutionary government, this new society, would never countenance the kind of mass slaughter that all these imperialist powers feel they must be able to do and threaten in order to keep their system going.
So it's important that people see the different kind of society that we could bring about through an actual revolution. Earlier, I spoke about the importance for people to be standing up. We raised slogans last year: no U.S. NATO war with Russia, no World War III. It's this system, not humanity, that needs to become extinct. Now I'd like to go to the end of that excerpt from the answer to the first question in the second interview that Bob Avakian did with the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show that really gets to how do we look at this situation with the war in Ukraine.
So, this is the dangers that are going on, and all this ridiculous stuff, people sticking their heads down or, I stay in my own lane. You think if there's a nuclear war, it won't touch your lane? I mean, come on, let's get fucking serious around here. You think if U.S. and China go to war, your lane is going to be somehow, I'm just going along in my lane. I mean, people need to wake up and get serious. This is a contest between oppressors, the world's leading oppressors, with the U.S. #1. Yes, USA #1 oppressor and plunderer in the entire world for decades. And, it's up to us to oppose our own ruling class. Yes, we also oppose Russian imperialism. Yes, we also oppose Chinese imperialism. But we're not living in Russia, and we're not living in China. And if we were living in Russia and China, our primary focus would be on opposing our ruling class where we were. We live in the United States. All these crimes committed by these imperialists are done in our name. Supposedly, the army goes out there to protect our freedoms and blah, blah, blah. They go out there to plunder people so that U.S. imperialism can suck the blood of literally billions of people. And if you think I'm exaggerating, go on the website, revcom.us, and read the articles by Raymond Latta, which get into the parasitism of U.S. imperialism, how it is an international exploiter and super exploiter of people in the global south or the third world, the poorer countries of the world, and what this has to do with what the U.S. looks like internally and how it thrives. Even the consumer goods that people have are cheapened, more affordable to the massive population here because of the way that people are viciously exploited. More than 150 million children in the third world who have no childhood. Hundreds of millions of women, like those in Bangladesh working in factories, making the stuff that goes to Walmart or whatever. People all over the world in similar situations. It is our responsibility to oppose this primarily, while we also oppose these other imperialists. This is where we live. This is being done in all these massive crimes, and now the threat of existential threat of nuclear war. A threat to that's what existential means, threat to the existence of humanity. All that's being done in our name. And idiots like, Steve Van Sant aside, now I'm giving him a break by saying idiocy. We have a responsibility to first and foremost oppose our own imperialist ruling class and what it's doing. And more generally, I've made a statement and I'll make it again. The masses of people in the world, and this is very acutely and urgently posed now, the masses of people in the world cannot any longer afford. It was always terrible that these are the people ruling the world, but it's now acutely posed. We can no longer afford to allow these imperialists to dominate the world and to determine the destiny of humanity. They need to be overthrown as quickly as possible.